Hey everybody, Melissa Clothier here with Assemblyman Chuck Devore of California, and if you've watched before, I've interviewed Chuck before, and it's a pleasure to talk to you again today.
It's great to be here at Red State in Austin, Texas.
Yes. You having a good time?
Yes, I am. It was fun to listen to Governor Rick Perry this morning, and really fun to go, what do they call it, sporting clays with him last night. I guess that's a quintessential Texas entertainment.
Have you done that before?
I haven't. I've shot clay pigeons, but I've never done it where they have these stations with very difficult exposures. You know, and that was fun.
Now you're a former military guy, right?
I'm in the U.S. Army retired reserve now, so technically I'm still in.
So you're used to guns.
I'm used to guns, but it's different where you have a clay pigeon like spring out of the bush at a certain angle it's
tiny
fun.
center of mass.
Well, that's why you use a shotgun and not an M16.
Exactly. See, I thought maybe you guys who'd done the military thing would be really good at something like that. I don't know.
Well, I think I broke more clay pigeons than certainly any other lawmaker there.
Oh,
really? I think there was only 2 lawmakers there, though. So.
Yeah, that was a good time. So, California. I want to talk to you about California because, as you noted in your speech, what happens there tends to happen at the federal government level,
right,
for horrendous reasons. And the thing that comes to mind when I think of that is cap and trade legislation, and which I view as pretty much destroying California. And maybe you can you explain to people why it's such a bad idea?
Right. Well, California's version of cap and trade was AB 32, Assembly Bill 32, passed in 2006 and signed with great flourish by Governor Schwarzenegger. And to put simply, it's the concept that Californians on their own, whether through our own action or the force of our moral suasion, our moral authority, can somehow save the world from itself with mainly carbon dioxide emissions by reducing those emissions. Now, what the law says is that by 2020, only 10 years from now, California has to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions by 30%, basically back to 1990 levels. The challenge with doing this is that California already has the highest electrical costs in the lower 48. We're the most electrically efficient state in the Union already. We have a ban on modern nuclear power, so you can't build any new modern nuclear power plants. And so when you look at where the energy comes from to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, and not, by the way, this isn't just electricity, this is vehicular emissions and stationary emissions, what you realize is that the state will essentially bankrupt itself to make this happen, because as we increase the cost of energy in California, we will drive the last remaining manufacturing jobs out of the state, where we already have high taxes, heavy regulatory burden. We already have the highest energy costs in the lower 48. Now those energy costs will be 35 to 40% greater, which means that if you're a cement manufacturer or steel manufacturer, you're gone. You can't afford to operate in California anymore. Now here's the challenge with it from an environmental standpoint. Let's for a moment think, just as a thought exercise, that humans are causing global warming and that you somehow want to reduce these emissions, that reducing emissions is a good thing. If you think that, then the California law will actually set us back. Well, why is that? Well, because of leakage. And what will happen is that the goods and services that will be driven out of California will still be produced somewhere on the planet.
Right.
They're going to be produced in places like Texas or Pennsylvania,
China,
or who's going to go overseas, of course, China and India. And the thing about that is that if California is the most electrically efficient state in the country, and we have the most stringent environmental controls in the country, how does it profit the environment globally if your policies drive the production of goods and services out of the state to states that are less efficient and have less stringent environmental laws, or, for God forbid, to countries like China and India that are largely coal-fired, that are far less efficient from a productivity standpoint, and therefore will take a lot more energy and a lot more pollution and emissions to produce the same thing that used to be produced in California.
Right.
Now, to take it a step further, if you got rid of all privately owned automobiles in California, you still couldn't make your 30% reduction. If you got rid of all electrical production in California, you couldn't make that number. So this is a big deal to try to reduce emissions by 30%. It's frankly impossible to do without shutting down significant portions of the California economy. But this is the task that they've set themselves, and now that California did it in 2006, of course, President Obama is doing it not through legislation, because Barbara Boxer failed in her cap-and-trade legislation, but now they're doing it through regulatory fiat, through the Environmental Protection Administration, using an EPA ruling that carbon dioxide is a toxic pollutant under the Clean Air Act, even though it's a natural substance that trees need to use, and crops and grass and everything else needs to use through photosynthesis to grow. It's a fertilizer. It's not like nitrous oxide compounds or sulfur dioxide compounds that are harmful.
Right.
It's a useful substance that plants need. So to simply say CO2 is now a toxic emission that needs to be regulated is really completely outside of the scope of the Clean Air Act. But that's what they're using now to do through regulation, what California's done through law, and what Barbara Boxer tried and failed to do through legislation in the Senate.
Well, it seems to me that California will have a pristine environment when all the people leave.
Well, and what's interesting about that, again, just indulging in a thought exercise, let's say we could eliminate the state of California tomorrow, and without getting too dramatic about it, I mean, assuming it wasn't through some apocalyptic
earthquake
where the people's bodies would then emit, methane and stuff as they were rotting, assuming that you just got rid of everybody and they vanished, right? Just
poof, gone.
Pop, poof, right? Exactly. If that were to happen, 1 year's worth of economic growth of China would wipe out the gain caused by the reduction of California's greenhouse gas emissions. That shows the folly of what it is we're trying to do. 1 year of growth in China would wipe out, completely eliminating California. So it's like, why are we trying to impoverish ourselves to accomplish what? It's not going to accomplish anything from an environment, assuming you even think that man is causing global warming.
So what do you think is accomplished? I mean, my personal feeling is it's a kind of, especially with cap and trade, it's a new way for speculators to make money and trade and sell and control the people.
It's about control. In California, we've seen this through water. Water has been the way that people have been controlled in California for some time by the left. We're a state that actually has plenty of water, but the water is up north and the people are down south. And so you need to get the water down south, or you end up with stringent controls on what you can develop and what you can build. Energy is even an all more pervasive thing that you can then control, because if you can control the sources of energy, how it's produced, how it's distributed, how it's used, you can control all aspects of human life. And that is the ultimate objective. You saw it with that one bill that I described. It's in my top 20 bills to veto list that is listed on the Flash report, John Fleischman's Flash report. And something I worked on with Senator Mimi Walters, who's running for California Treasurer. There was this bill by Kevin De Leon, as I recall, that would take 10% of all the fee money generated by fining people for violating the global greenhouse gas emissions, and direct that 10% of money as a slush fund into Democrats' districts, districts supposedly impacted by global warming. I think, whoa, how are you impacted by global warming? I mean, how can you prove an impact? And how is it that it's only impacting, quote, poor communities rather than, rich coastal communities? I mean, come on. I mean,
but that's not the point. The point is redistribution of wealth.
It's another vehicle to redistribute wealth and another vehicle to control, because what the left in California has been trying to do for some time, you see this with their legislation, where they, for example, try to create these transit villages where they have special tax breaks and subsidies to try to get people out of their cars, live in high-rise, high-density apartment buildings,
right,
and then be dependent on mass transit run by whom? By government employee unions.
Right.
So that we're now completely dependent on government to get to our place of work. And oh, by the way, our place of work should be close to where we live, because that's their concept of how we should live. With the exception, of course, being people like Al Gore with his gigantic house. And by the way, he has a gigantic energy guzzling house in the Bay Area as well.
Right, now, yeah.
So, you know,
lucky you have a new California resident.
Yes,
one of them. Everybody else is leaving. Al Gore's coming. That doesn't bode well.
Lucky for us.
Well, what are your personal plans now? You're, like you said, you're termed out.
Well, I'd like to pay the mortgage, keep Mrs. Devore happy.
That'd be good.
Keep my name out there in the public. So name ID is very perishable. Our name ID, by the way, was sky high on the eve of the election. According to the field poll, which is a reliable but left-leaning poll, we had a 49% name ID among likely Republican voters, of which 41% was positive, and only 7% negative. I think was 41 and 8 actually. I think was what it was. That's obviously deteriorated quite a bit since the primary, just in the last few months, because that's the way it works. And lastly, I'd like to stay involved in public policy, and whether that's by working with like the Claremont Institute or having a talk radio show, being involved with some other nonprofit. I don't know yet. I've got some irons in the fire, and I've been talking to people. And aside from that, redistricting will happen. If the Democrats don't succeed in overturning the Independent Redistricting Commission, we'll have new district boundaries by late March, early April of 2011. And at that point, you know, my political future will become more clear, and we'll see whether or not perhaps another run at elective office is in the cards in the 2012 cycle.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. Please my best to your wife, and one of the joys for everybody listening has been meeting so many wonderful people. There are good people running for office, and you know, people can get cynical, you know, like that all politicians are bad, and it's just simply not true. There's guys like Chuck Devore who deserve our support.
You know, 98% of the politicians give the other 2% of us a bad name.
Yeah, exactly. That's about it. Well, thank you very much.